There are three major conversations happening over dinner tables around the world, and particularly in the United States. How fast is AI really moving? Is social media okay for the kids? Are the kids okay? How will the US election go in the beginning of November? Three seemingly distinct conversations. So, how can we make sense of what they have in common? That's why my guest this week is Dan Perkle. Dan is partner and senior executive director of IDEO's media entertainment and technology practice. I'm just going to say that one more time because I feel like I hiccuped on you again. Okay. That's why my guest this week is Dan Perkle. Dan is partner and senior executive director of IDEO's media, entertainment, and technology practice in North America, where he works with some of the world's leading companies to imagine new digital platforms and experiences, writing their next chapter of sustainable growth. He's also written and studied extensively on the topic of digital media and young people's everyday use of digital technologies. He's also a fan of pop culture, so we're going to keep it relevant. Get ready to be the smartest person in the room. But first, welcome to this week's episode of Make Sense, a video podcast where we pull back the curtain on the high-tech industry and discuss different technologies' impacts on our everyday lives pragmatically and without the jargon. So whether you're totally hyped on artificial intelligence and you're ready for the robot takeover, cool, or you want to crawl into a cave after deleting all of your social media accounts, I don't blame you. I'm here with my guests to help make sense of what's going on so you can design yourself into the future. My name is Lindsay, the Lady Engineer. I am an innovation catalyst and digital storyteller, pragmatic futurist, and human-first technologist. If you're new here, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Let's make sense of AI, media, the kids, and the election. Dan, how are you?
Hello, how are you? Thanks for that intro. That was fun.
I love where you are sitting right now with all the toys behind you. It seems like it's crafted for, your expertise or your past expertise.
Yeah, maybe this is it's part of our toy lab, and
Oh,
if
cool.
I didn't do much of the crafting of it, but it's a fun place to do one of these recordings.
It's awesome. I've always thought IDEO seems like a cool, fun place to work, and you've been there for quite a while.
Yeah, it's been about 12 and a half years, and it's been constant learning. So,
That's
and
awesome. That's awesome. Feed that brain up there. So, our first segment on this episode of Make Sense with Dan Perkle is a new segment called Never Have I Ever.
oh man,
I didn't tell Dan about this before he hit record. I'm going to call out past internet habits, and I want you to tell me if you have or have not done that. And if there's a funny story behind it, do tell. You ready?
oh my gosh, well, we'll see how boring I am. I'm super curious now to know what you're going to ask.
Okay.
Go for it.
Never have I ever gotten in trouble for downloading music from Napster.
I have not gotten in trouble for it. I have definitely done it. I
Okay.
mean, that was a long time ago,
Yeah.
but no, I did not get in trouble for that. I think
Summer
they
of
had bigger.
yeah.
I would
Go.
have said they had bigger fish to fry, but I do have friends who have gotten in trouble, so they didn't have that much bigger fish to fry. They
Yeah.
like to go over after folks like me, but no, I
I'm
wasn't.
I'm drinking my water because summer of 2004 I did a fellowship at Texas A&M and M, and I started downloading music on Napster, and their like network admin sent me an email right away telling me to stop. So
It does happen. I mean, Napster aside, what was the Downton Abbey? A lot of companies had folks finding ways to get Downton Abbey onto local computers, and that led to some cease and desists around the world. So I heard.
okay, all right. Okay, how about this one? Never have I ever played chat roulette unironically.
Again, never. I played it to see how it worked.
Okay.
That's a blast from the past. Chat roulette.
Yeah.
Part of just learning everyday interactions. Like, what are people getting excited about, and how can we get inspired and use those in things? And then chat roulette was one of those. Ooh,
Yeah.
what is this
So
like?
so I just finished up a series of reaction videos to Silicon Valley HBO, and in season 1, episode 7 or 8, Jared mentions chat roulette. he's talking about startups that have pivoted and how chat roulette started as, a playground for meeting strangers until it was taken over by the sexually monstrous. And I love that line. But I asked on my Instagram stories if anyone had unironically used chat roulette, and I was surprised how many people replied and said yes, that they had used it.
Look, people are looking for all kinds of connections out there. I mean, it's nothing. I mean, it's another way, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I told you this was going to be fun. Um, Never have I ever woken up thinking in 140 characters because I was using Twitter too much.
Ooh, that's a good question because I'm tempted to say no, but I bet the answer is actually yes. I didn't, if you go through my history of Twitter, which I don't really recommend because it's not that interesting, I'm much more of a consumer than a poster. And I do a lot of retweets
Hmm.
and quote tweets. So no, I probably didn't get too obsessed with the 140 character limit.
Yeah,
I wish I could say. How about you? It sounds like you have. You've been in that
yeah,
mode.
I do remember in 2009 going to a conference on the peninsula called She's Geeky. And I, for some reason, remember that I woke up that day thinking in 140 characters. And it was something that I mentioned as like an introduction to myself. We were going around just saying something funny about ourselves. And so it stuck with me that was a habit. But I too am not much of a Twitter user. Definitely not anymore since it's been called X.
Yeah, I mean, and also there's no character limit anymore, right? It's just like a long. It's been a while since I've even worried or thought about that, but I do
Yeah.
love the origin of this limits and where it comes from.
Okay, final one. Never have I ever had an unhealthy relationship with digital badges and check-ins.
Oh my gosh, when would I have? Okay, I'm going to really bore your audience and again say no. I keep my digital media relationships fairly healthy, unless we're talking about too many video games or binging too many TV shows. No, again, sorry. I
Okay,
wish,
that's okay.
wish I had some great story to tell you,
That's okay.
but I'd love to
I
hear
had
yours.
I was Yelp Elite for 3 years in the mid
Oh my
aughts.
gosh.
Yeah. But I do think like I left San Francisco when Foursquare and check-ins became like a big thing. I also think, and for audience reference, Dan and I went to the same graduate school. I think our graduate school like taught imbued like internet etiquette into us, and checking in and getting caught up in those games and stuff. I felt like I understood the pawn that I was becoming very
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly had my own pawn moments. Like when I did a lot of research on the site DeviantArt, and
Hmm.
one of the things that drove some people loved and some people drove them crazy is like these little indicators of status.
Mm.
Like you had a tilde before your name or an asterisk or a dollar sign or something. And at first it was so new to me, I didn't care. And then as I got more and more into it and studying the culture that was kind of part of that, I would say I did become much more like, I came a little bit I wouldn't say obsessed, but definitely like, oh, this person's more important. And then I had to really catch myself and be like, no, 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 that's, they're not more important. But just, so those markers of status are a big deal. They're
Is it
designed
a
to do that.
predecessor of the blue check mark?
Oh, for sure. But it's also not it's kind of like not only it's a kind of a predecessor of sorts to the blue check mark. It's also a follower of sorts to what used to exist on forums and text-based things where you just had to distinguish yourself in some way where there wasn't a lot of bandwidth for imagery and video and other stuff.
Okay.
So it was a way of just saying kind of a like representing yourself. And they had like a two-tiered membership model. And then also if you had other roles in the community, you got different things. And I definitely found myself at times being like, oh, somebody who has like, I don't know, I'm going to make this one up, but somebody who has a dollar symbol said something to me. That's a big deal. And I'm like, wait, why do I care about that? Maybe do other people care about that or not? So that it raised the question, but yes, I wouldn't say I was not immune to those things.
Yeah. Okay. All right. You're a mere mortal like the rest of
Oh
us.
yeah, very much so.
So, being the first person to have played Never Have I Ever on this show, um, two questions. One, any feedback? Did it feel like fun?
It did feel like fun, except I felt the social pressure to say, "Oh my god, I hope she asked me at least one thing where I'm like, oh yeah, that was totally me, caught,
Okay.
guilty," and I had a, I think I was 0 for 4 on your standard questions, and then that made me feel like, man, maybe that's just that boring. And it's
What
possible.
what would have been the one that got you?
Oh my gosh. So, well, I noticed one of your trains was like it was definitely more retro, right? And so I was trying to think about the stuff that I did in the past, and I'm wondering if there's stuff that I do more currently. Probably spending I know hours and hours of my life trolling through LiveJournal might be one. I mean,
Okay.
LiveJournal is old school media.
Yeah.
That was a combination of fun and research, which is kind of where I combined a lot of my interests. But I spent a lot of time studying Harry Potter fan fiction on LiveJournal, and
Okay.
then reading it and genuinely enjoying it too. But then also
Yeah.
like trying to understand what was going on there and trying to map these stories. So I had many nights and weekends of just a lot of
Live
LiveJournal,
journal. Live journal fan fiction.
LiveJournal
Um,
fan fiction. There's a couple. I wonder are there other things like that
if
that
there
came to mind.
wasn't Never Have I Ever on DeviantArt, what would the thing be?
Ooh, for me or just in general for somebody else.
Yeah, like in the vein of this game, got in trouble for downloading from Napster, played chat roulette unironically, gotten caught up in badges.
That was tricky. So for me in DeviantArt, it was a weird. I was constantly self monitoring to like figure to avoid that. But I will say the kinds of things that would have existed then are like never have I ever traced somebody else's art. That would have been a thing that like somebody would have been, you
What does that
know,
mean?
trace. Oh, so like you draw an awesome character and then you'd sort of admit in the comments, well, or you wouldn't admit. Somebody would call you out and say, you trace this from so and so's account. And a trace would mean you probably grabbed a snapshot, you pulled it through Photoshop or Illustrator, maybe you downloaded it and printed it, and then you traced it. That
Yeah.
was one. There was a lot of like, oh, you traced from a photograph.
Okay.
Tracing was a bit offensive to some people, and not everybody agreed with that. But it was in that vein of like what's socially acceptable. And DeviantArt had like everything was acceptable or not acceptable depending on who you
Okay.
talk to. So again, my role, I was like so worried about alienating anybody. I had to be pretty careful. But I think that would be like tracing was a rough one. Stealing, like we talked about stealing in the past, like just ripping somebody off would have been a big no-no. There was a little bit of like, kind of like art in general, creativity in general, people wanting to it's a way to explore your personal sense of self. And for some people, those things were, like maybe they were really into creating anthropomorphic characters and doing role playing, and other people
Yeah.
would make fun of that. So I didn't make fun of any of that stuff, but I think that would catch people. I can imagine somebody who's 24 looking back at their 14-year-old self being like, oh, I did that. I did that. I
I
think that,
used to ride people so hard for tracing.
oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, that's a good point, actually. Not even doing the tracing, but being the person to like yell at somebody for tracing. That's actually a better one.
Yeah.
That's why you're the host.
Okay. All right. Our second segment on this episode of Make Sense with Dan Perkle is Deep Dive. So, in this segment, we get into the details about a specific issue and its implications for everyday people. So, speaking of tracing, copying, copyright, I first want to get your yay or nay on a prediction that I made earlier this year
Okay.
that at least one major copyright case against AI will change its trajectory.
Do you mean in general or this year that'll happen?
I I meant for it to happen this year. A quick like headline search shows that like it did, I don't think it did, but
Yeah. I
can
think it'll happen.
copyright slow AI down?
I don't know. I wouldn't predict it'll slow it down because I don't think there's like a speed. This is a controversial take. I don't know if there's a speed that anybody can measure that it's going at. I mean, certainly you can see the measurements and changes of accuracy and predictions, and you can measure those speeds of things. But in terms of cultural progress, I don't know. I do tend to agree with you that I think there will be a major copyright case. It might be this New York Times one. It might be something else. That will definitely have an effect on the industry. I think one of the things I'm trying to dig back into my memories, but there's this wonderful history of piracy
Hmm.
written by this historian Adrian Johns. It's a great book, and it's really easy to read. And he's like this historian of technology, and he writes that like whenever there are these big conflicts over piracy, I'm kind of summarizing, not a quote, I'm summarizing,
Yeah.
but it's always like this intersection of creativity, commerce, and culture or communication. I don't know. There's some C's in there. These are the moments that really there are these fundamental moments in history, and he points to a bunch of them over the last 200 years. And I do think there will be serious cases. The courts will make their decisions. Again, does it slow things down or speed things up? I'm not going to predict that, but I will talk about it'll change the balance of the players. But in the end, those tend to favor the powerful. But
Mm.
that doesn't mean between the cracks there might be some new things, interesting things to do.
You mentioned the New York Times case. Now, I had read about a recent decision with a judge in your neck of the woods who approved a artist copyright case to go forward, and which
Mhm.
was and that was actually against deviant art, including and stability AI and some other ones. Um, but what was the New York Times one? Is that the one with OpenAI and Microsoft?
Yeah. They're basically suing them to say that they trained on all of their stuff. And I mean, it gets one. I'm not a copyright lawyer. I have studied this in the past, and I'm not like well versed as well versed. But they basically say that it doesn't constitute fair use for a variety of reasons. And of course, OpenAI. I'm not sure what Microsoft statements are, but OpenAI is it is fair use. Here are the reasons. New York Times saying it's not fair use. Here are the reasons. They're complicated, and like a lot of this legal stuff, you can go in and find precedents for a lot of everything, and it gets very particular. Like you have to kind of bend over backwards and jump through hoops to get probably either side of that case when the decision is made. There'll be a lot of ways to say, wow, it's a lot of contortion somebody had to make to get to the decision, but that seems to be the way these laws get hashed out.
Right. If OpenAI has trained on all of New York Times content, it seems really hard for them to roll back their large language models to take that content out. If anything, maybe New York Times will get paid.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a settlement, right?
Yeah.
Settlements are often the way these things go, and maybe that's it. And if it's just a settlement in the end, I guess it depends on the nature of the settlement and what the ripple effects would be. Settlements, I'll say something that's really probably out of turn. I don't know if settlements have as much implication as like a ruling.
Mm.
That said, I'm sure there's some lawyer out there who'd be like, you're bonkers. There's tons of settlements that have huge impacts. So yeah, I can imagine somebody saying, well, they settled in this case, but yeah,
Well,
it's possible.
the interesting thing is that it feels like this conversation of the internet and copyright has, you know, basically has been evolving and continuing, and there hasn't really ever been has there ever been like a decision? Something about what you said about the settlements makes me think that like the settlement doesn't actually tell us what is right and wrong and what is allowed or not
Yeah,
allowed in the future, what is
yeah. I
theft
mean,
versus,
there,
um,
there, there have been some decisions. I mean, like another one recently. Again, it's hard to know until many years later the impact, but like the Andy Warhol, uh, the foundation was found that they did violate somebody's copyright. Again, just totally blanking on. There's a photograph of a painting. Argued it was transformative. Was found not to be. That does have
mhm.
implications. Like people will think twice. There are plenty of there's plenty of cases in the past, and Jeff Koons had some work, and that was a big one. I'm blanking on it. All my former copyright teachers will
Yeah.
probably be shamed that I can't remember anything. I will
So
say one thing in your question that I want to call attention to that I think is interesting is right and wrong versus copyright violation and not copyright violation, because those are two very different things. And
let's talk
so,
about the right and wrong
yeah, yeah,
versus actual copyright, because neither of us are legal scholars, so we'll
right,
just struggle through the conversation.
exactly.
I guess though a lot of the contemporary copyright cases against AI is about, artists feeling like their work was used or companies feeling like what they created was used to train large language models. And I think there's like the shadow libraries. There's this idea of like, are you allowed to use them or are you not? Like, do you have to have accountability and traceability to your sources for AI or not? That's the decision I'm looking like I want to know.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, let's talk about right or wrong and the tension between that.
Well, that thing you just mentioned about the idea of attribution or being able to trace a source, that gets much more into the. I mean, I'm sure there's some legal implications of that as well, but that definitely gets into the right versus wrong. Some like when I was studying artists in the past, and I've seen this kid thing now. Like some people actually don't care about the use as long as they feel like they're getting some credit for it. It's like, oh, what does it matter to me? I got now. That's probably not true of major corporation. And again, you have to sort of like distinguish who's a major corporation versus who's just a Joe Schmo or me sitting in making something and getting famous for it by accident or not getting famous at all. So there's that. But there's some people who are like, no, I don't really, credit doesn't really matter to me. You got to ask my permission. This is my thing. I need to give you permission. And
Right.
that's certainly not, that's not entirely what the law states in all places. But then there's the question of making money off things. So that's another thing. And does that matter? And it's almost like everybody has a different sensibility, and that's sort of set by the norms of your community that you're trying to participate in, right?
Right.
Community broadly speaking. So the right versus wrong is pretty interesting, and that point about attribution is a good one to kind of
How
poke at.
does today's conversation echo the conversations that were taking place like 15, 20 years ago?
I mean, yeah, really. What to think about history rhyming rather than repeating? I mean, there's definitely a lot of the same questions, especially when you're on X/Twitter or anything else, and you're reading the comments of individual artists. Like, what are the comic book artists saying now? What are the individuals saying? It's a lot of echoes. Like, this is just theft. I didn't allow you to do this. I didn't want this to happen. It's violating my sense of who I am, which is actually one of the biggest things. Again, this is right and wrong. This is their sense of right and wrong. It's not my judgment, and
Right.
it's also not what the law would say. It's like there's somebody saying this just feels like it's norm shattering, and it really makes me feel. And one of the things I wrote about is that it actually feels quite demoralizing and makes you feel insignificant as a
Yeah.
person. And that gets right into questions of ethics and right and wrong. So I've seen plenty of those conversations, which were very similar to what I was seeing online 15 years ago in the heyday of Web 2.0. And wow, look, my drawing for this character I saw on a T-shirt at a store in a mall.
Hmm.
How did that happen? Why is that right? And my whole identity has been stripped away, right? I've seen that in the context of generative AI conversations. And I think some companies, what I think is interesting is companies have responded a bit. I mean, there has been a lot of, again, I don't know how much this is response to the law or response to pressure, but there has been a bit of preemptive. You can't really do a lot of like, ooh, in the style of Lindsay, write this thing. Like they try to they've stripped a lot of those features back since the early days. And probably somebody could argue they didn't have to legally.
You're saying like in a chat GPT or a Gemini, I have found dead ends, like a maze where I am using a prompt and I ask something, and then all of a sudden it's like, we don't comment on people. We
Yeah,
don't comment on political parties. We don't, whatever. And I was like,
yeah.
well, I wasn't quite asking that, but I appreciate that more than just flagrant kind of disregard for anything, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I wouldn't say it's the origin of these tools, but my introduction, I mean, a few years ago was when certainly on Stability and in Midjourney and Dali, when you could say, uh, in the style of this artist.
Hmm.
And for most people, that's kind of like a novelty trick. It's really fun, right? It's like make this person in the style of Andy Warhol, whatever. Pick something.
Right.
They just want to show somebody else and be like, isn't this fun? Look what I made. And I made my friend a birthday card. That's
Yeah.
it. But
Right.
but the pressures of like all the other things and a lot of that stuff. If you go into Dolly now, if you name somebody's style, they're just like, no, we don't really want to do that.
What's been the most interesting part of watching this conversation unfold?
Oh, the most interesting part. Um, I do think it's like how. Okay, so again, back 15 years ago, I feel like this was a conversation happening amongst academics, public commentators, niche communities, individual artists. and then of course there was like it was kind of sitting on the backs of bigger cases about like Disney suing people for showing like a Disney movie at a school. So that was all in the background, but it felt small. But now it just feels like, hey, you know what the whole world's going to talk about at the same time? Copyright.
Mhm. Like everyone's gonna be talking
I
about
mean, because
copyright.
suddenly a lot of these things are, one is the tools are kind of being used by everybody in quotes. I mean, I don't think really it's everybody, but they're certainly so prevalent in so many fields of work. And then there are terms being used like ethically sourced data, which
Mhm.
sounds a funny term we can come back to, but ethically sourced data, you're like, I get it. The intent is great. And I'm all for it. So it's like, then you're being asked to wrestle with, well, am I using something am I stepping on somebody? So I think that it's the what's interesting, back to your question, the bringing that all up to the mainstream is like, this is a conversation. Again, I don't know who's listening. I don't know who your audience is exactly. And they might be like, I've never had a conversation about copyright. What's this guy talking about? But I've really seen it like in a way that I never would have anticipated.
I I think you're right. It is more mainstream, and sometimes I see these mainstream conversations and I'm like, oh, like bullet to the head. We've been having this conversation for 15 to 20 years. Can we come up with a resolution? But when I think about the purpose of this podcast and the people that are listening that are sitting on the edges, they're in the technology industry, but they're sitting on the edges as far
Hmm.
as their technical like acumen. Um, I want those people to be part of the conversation, right? Because at the end of the day, we know the adoption curve, and it's like this bell curve, and we need the people in the middle to participate in the conversation. Because if it's just academics and a select group of people, like we're not
Yeah.
representing the whole. Uh, we're not,
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
knew that in the Bay Area 20 years ago that we weren't representing the whole at the time,
Yeah.
right?
No, no, you're totally right. I mean, we're not representing the whole now, being in the Bay
Yeah.
Area, but I think you're absolutely right. Just your question about what's interesting. I mean, something else that does feel different. Again, the rhyming versus repeating idea, and this is where the word acceleration, speeding up, does feel interesting. Where so at the time when I was looking at this, the discussion about copyright and theft and morality was also overlaid with this other conversation about technology, where some people were using like this. It was almost like weaponizing intelligence in a way, but they would say things like, "Why are you fighting this? This is just how the internet works. It's just
Mm.
how the internet works." Okay, and I would like say, "Well, that's not how my internet works. That's not how I want it to work." And so there's this debate about how does the internet work, and that's what I found so interesting about it. Like the internet doesn't just work because somebody says like it technically works. There's this moral layer, there's this policy layer, there's all these different layers. So fast forward to today. So this is like, again, like Web 2.0 days. The internet had been in people's lives for a while. It was still, I mean, it's surprising to look back and
But
say 2007, 2008, it wasn't still as
but
mainstream.
for context, like 2007, 2008, our parents weren't on Facebook.
No, you're right. Well,
Twitter
we're
was
getting there.
only They weren't yet. Twitter was only for like niche geeks in the Bay Area. Like all my friends on the East Coast thought I was crazy when I told them about what Twitter was.
No, you're right. You're right.
There was vaguely the concept of user generated content and YouTube and stuff, but not in the way of like influencers, followers, algorithms optimized to like hog your in attention. So I mean, iPhones weren't like smartphones
Yeah,
didn't
I mean,
even.
again, like DeviantArt. No, you're absolutely right. I agree with everything you're saying. DeviantArt was one example of an interesting predecessor to so much of that, because so many of those practices existed, but they weren't as mainstream. And the point that I was trying to make though is that nobody right now is saying, "What do you mean it's copyright? This is just how generative AI works." Because
Yeah.
nobody has a clue as to how it works. It's not really. Oh, sorry. Again, apologies to everybody out there who does know how it works. But I'm saying this is large.
No, you're right. My
Yeah,
sister asked me, she's like, "What is like?" And
what
she's
is
just
it?
like, "What?
What is the internet?
How does it
But I
really
mean,
work?"
at that point, people could have a healthy debate, I think, and one that was, at times it was like childish, but at times it was like you'd be amazed at the intellectual rigor of it. Like, this isn't what the internet's for. This is not how it works. This is how technology works. You could have that discussion and really argue, well, is theft or is this moral violation opposed to technology or in line with it or what? I think that's a harder. I think right now the sort of notion of like all the moral issues are coming to the surface so fast, and I don't think there's been a huge debate. Well, you just don't get how AI works. You're stupid, because it's like, which is what that felt like back then. Like, you don't get the internet. You're stupid, and it's like that wasn't a very healthy perspective. I'd certainly, so that feels different. That feels different. Like that piece.
So, if anyone is only listening, if you are watching, my eyes just like lit up, and I was like, oh. um, that's why I'm so good at reaction videos. My face makes that. You can see my thoughts on my face. Um, that pompousness, though,
Mm.
that pompousness still exists, and that's what we're going to talk about next.
Oh boy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, on our third segment on this episode of Make Sense with Dan Perkle, no scrubs, just solutions. In this segment, we dive into strategies and techniques to solve the bigger problems we as a society face. So, in season 1 of Silicon Valley HBO, an entrepreneur pitches this company called Human Heater, which essentially microwaves people's skin to keep people warm in order to lower their electricity costs. Did you watch the show?
I watched Silicon Valley religiously when it came out. I loved it. Folks here said it hit too close to home, and I was like, I lived it. This is so fun.
Yeah.
I don't remember this episode well, but
So,
it is ringing a bell. So yes,
okay.
you could
So,
probably tell me anything they said, and I'd be like, oh yeah, I remember that, and you'd be like, that show never happened, but it could have. And
so,
keep
um,
going. Heater, right? Microwave your skin. Sounds like a good way to get a suntan. What was the premise?
right? Who's trying to heat people?
Oh,
So,
just- okay.
instead of a regular room heater. Um, I, I described this in another video. I decided to do the reaction videos for season 1, and I will probably move on to season 2. I decided to do it, but one reason of my 5 reasons was exposure therapy. I had been like avoiding rewatching it because it hit too close to
Well,
home.
you're one of those people.
And one of these things was the pompousness. So when the judge at TechCrunch Disrupt challenged the founder of Human Heater, she was like, I don't think anyone's going to use this. This can't be safe. He replied, trust me, it is safe. She's like, I don't trust you, and I don't think it's safe. But
Yeah.
this type of pompousness on display from many of leaders in the tech industry, um, it, I believe, is the antithesis to innovation.
Mm.
So, as a pop culture enthusiast yourself, Dan, what do you think about the tech CEO hero persona?
Ooh, this is tough because I do work at a company that works with tech CEOs. So I have to be a little guarded.
Specifically the hero part, the
Yeah,
like,
I
we're saving the world and my shit does not stink.
yeah. I mean, you're leading the witness here. I definitely. I'm personally wary of it. I mean, I think that really it goes beyond tech. I think kind of lionizing, creating heroes out of business leaders is even if they're actually like incredibly generous and incredibly like the opposite of what you have in mind. Like somebody like Warren Buffett comes to mind as like it's really hard to find like the what you have in your mind and Warren Buffett kind of don't go together at all. But
No.
he's of course lionized by the financial communities. I read one of the books about Buffett. I loved it. I'm like this. So we do wish to have these heroes people we aspire to and be like and want to. And I get it. It kind of gives it sets like a purpose sometimes to people. Like if I can be like that, kind of it gives them an identity. It's probably why kings, politicians, gods. Maybe. I mean, I'm talking out of my depth here, but I have read some of the history of fame and how it relates to religion and stuff. And so there is an element to that which I think has its place. But when you get into technology and like just because somebody runs a unicorn company or got $1 billion in money, I mean they're not necessarily a hero, right? And I'm not saying anything that I'm sure all your listeners wouldn't disagree with. So it's not a very that isn't the most insightful opinion, but it's like I think it's a little bit dangerous too. You just don't want to have. I don't think you want to have everybody worshiping these people because they're creating something strange that you don't understand. That I think is risky. It's risky for society.
Yeah.
Risky for careers also, but I'm not sure.
So one of the predictions in 2023 when I started Make Sense that I pitched to different guests was, is the age of the tech CEO hero coming to an end?
Mm.
I.e., Elon Musk kind of went mask off with X and all of his behavior around the acquisition. Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX, and some other kind of like the demise of certain big CEO types. Past years, Travis, forget his
Kalanick?
last name from
Yeah.
Uber. Um, do you think it's coming to an end, or do you think it is kind of going to continue to perpetuate?
I think it's going to continue, but not because of any inherent like evilness. I think, I mean, it seems like American society, maybe capitalist society, to get really grand, post-capitalist. I don't know. We do tend to love our business leaders who create certain forms of value and wealth, even if it's unevenly distributed. There's still a lot of wealth creation somewhere, and I think as long as we worship that, and as long as the tech industry is a contributor to that, I don't see why. I mean, that would be true. It'd be true for banks also, right? To me, I don't see there's no real difference between worshiping like a leader in like in different fields, or like a Bob Iger at Disney or somebody
Mm-hmm.
else who really get behind these charismatic leaders. Um, Another theoretical thing from sociology we can talk about some other time, but yeah, it's like I don't think it's really coming to an end, and then at least, and I think the evidence seems to point to the contrary. I mean, just look to OpenAI.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that every company is run by somebody who's become that way, but they're in all these new fields and all these new technologies. There are these people who are looked to as either tier one, tier two.
Like
There's some
larger than life icon.
there's some hierarchy to it, I'm sure. I mean, maybe that's directly correlated to how many times they appear in the New York Times, or maybe it's related to their unique imprint on a certain culture or a certain
Yeah.
like elite status. I don't know why Sam Bankman-Fried is in that group. It's interesting, but I don't. You think your characterization is right. There was this round of like worship of him that didn't last that long now, but you didn't know that 3 years ago it wouldn't last. So I don't know. That's
I
my take. So my take is, I guess, no, it's not going to go away.
I think you're right that maybe it's naturally a human behavior. Maybe not all humans, but for humans to look for a leader, and sometimes that leader is overall net negative, and sometimes that leader is overall net positive. But I think what I want to kind of move on to is like if we bring it down to the practitioner level, this judge is challenging a founder, saying, "I don't think that this is
Okay.
going to be something that's marketable," and the founder's just like, "Trust me." If you're talking to like a team of designers, maybe on your team, and someone said that, how do you think that impacts the actual design work and solution work that mindset of trust me? Because I'll say one more thing. I think a lot of young innovators who haven't experienced a lot of failure look to the fairy tales of Steve Jobs and Henry Ford and think that they need to be a visionary, right? And need to be like, trust me, this is the big vision. This is what comes next. So
Yeah.
let's take it to the practitioner level. Back to the
Right.
question. As a designer on a team.
Yeah. So this is it's a great question. I think, part of the work we do at IDEO, it's really, really collaborative, right? And the whole idea of collaboration is built into our values. And one of our values is to collaborate. We're incentivized, not financially, but we're culturally incentivized to collaborate and collaborate well. And part of that is because usually the outcomes of the design work are significantly better. We have another value that kind of goes along with this, which is make others successful, which is like, how am I going to make sure you succeed, no matter who you are on my team? Like, I'm not going to be a competitive force. That doesn't mean there aren't arguments, but it's like this stuff is like fundamental to how we think about design, how we think about innovation, et cetera. So to your question, where it's tricky, and it's a great one, is that there's a healthy like balance. You're always walking here, especially because you have people with incredible expertise and skills on these teams. So like there's somebody who's like just so good at maybe interaction design, or somebody who's phenomenal at visual communication design,
Hmm.
or, or like brand work, or whatever the practice. And we have a lot of these crafts here. So it is important to recognize that expertise, but it's also important for that person to be able to tell a story as to why it is the way it is. And it's always open for anybody on a team to be able to question anything, and for that question to be taken pretty seriously.
Mm.
So I think if I were in a room and I observe, I'll talk about observing interactions between two designers because it gets all caught up in like power dynamics otherwise. But if I was, and somebody just tell me, it's like, you know what, can you just help, how would that work? And you said, trust me. I think that wouldn't fly very well. I'd have to coach them how to explain it. On the other hand, even the question, like the first mode that we're in isn't usually critique like that. The first
Hmm.
mode is usually like, oh, I see what you're doing, and I'm going to build on that. It's classic yes and culture. It's from improv. It's not we
Great.
didn't.
Yeah.
And so I think you sort of have, the other thing is trying to have a very healthy mix of, oh, I love what you did. Let me build on it. Let me build on it. And if somebody says, then if that, it kind of goes back and forth, like you wouldn't really embody that value if somebody said, oh, I like your build, but no, it sucks. Trust me. That would sort of fall flat of that. But usually that gets us somewhere good. So I've, am I rambling in the wrong direction?
No,
But I think the
I
point
love
was
I
more,
love I love the idea of bringing the improv and the yes and
yeah.
into collaboration. I also like the idea of we have our specialties and we each are confident enough in our specialties and humble enough to respect other people's specialties. What
Yeah,
if
because
we,
usually, can I sorry to interrupt, but I mean,
sorry,
I think
no, go.
often the question comes from not a place of ignorance, but a question of somebody else's specialty, which is, I'm glad you said it that way because it's a really important point. If I'm asking a designer that question, let's say me as a design researcher on a team, and I'm asking somebody, I'm like, what's the furthest thing that I don't know how to do? Like industrial engineering or something, or not, sorry, like mechanical engineering or something I really don't get, or even like detail. I mean, I get software more. Whatever it is. Um, Often the questions I'm asking are questions that come from my really informed expertise of my own. And
Hmm.
certainly it butts into, there's ignorance of, but then you kind of, your goal is to like get everything to a better place by seeing the balance between those things. But
Right.
that doesn't mean that we don't have people who are super audacious in their individual dreams of, or creative or adventurous or brave. And it's like, maybe their job is to try to bring everybody along on their journey. And it's not a bad thing per se. That's a
Yeah.
good thing actually.
What if we externalize this pompousness towards the end user?
Ooh, good question. Would say more.
To so in a way of you're sitting in, you put out a product and your expectation is that your customers are just going to trust you and use the thing that you gave them.
Ah, so you're saying trust me to a consumer, not the other way around.
Yeah, like let's say that, right?
And
How
I'm
does
like,
that ego like it's a
I
my
can't see that
stuff
working
is
out.
so great, everyone will come and use it, but
I mean,
also
yeah, yeah. That
I'm
doesn't
so
seem to fly.
scared of negative feedback. I'm just going to tell you to trust me. That type of ego.
I mean, I don't think it's really, I mean, it might have helped you get to the part where where you've shipped something. I don't know because I wouldn't know. It's a
Yeah.
hypothetical story right now, but I don't think it's going to make you very successful, like as an attitude towards innovation. I think you really want to, our approach, my personal approach, but also I think Idea's approach is treat your customers with utmost respect, maybe more respect than anybody else in the stakeholder network that you're operating under. And don't just ask them to trust you. Like design, one is you should have had their input throughout the whole process,
Sure.
but of course you can't get everybody's input throughout the whole process. But then really value their thoughts on your thing, and just saying trust me is not, that's not going to fly. I mean, how many, again, I feel weird given my position to like pick on any one technology, but we've seen we've seen AI related hardware devices get launched without a clear value proposition or a reason to use it. Now, I don't think I've seen those leaders go out and say, just trust us, you'll love it. I mean, they might have said that to a venture capitalist, but I understand why, because they're trying to raise money and that's fine. But the things fail all the time. Everybody knows that. So I think, hey, you customer, trust me isn't
Well, I'll share with you because you've been at IDEO for, you know, over 12 years, and I've been in the startup world. So the number one reason startups fail is they launch to no market need, which means that they built a product without really considering the customer. And then when they launched it, no customers were there to get it, to like buy it.
yeah,
And there is this version of this pompousness and trust me where founders and early stage innovators are so high off their own idea and vision, believing that like if Steve Jobs and Henry Ford could do it, they could do it too.
right,
And we those two stories are myths. I have videos on that. But they believe that when they put it out there, everyone will come, right? If you build it, everyone will come.
right.
At the same time, what they aren't saying is that they're actually fearful that no one will get it. And they haven't put it out there early enough because they're scared of the negative feedback that tells them they might be wrong.
I mean, I think it's kind of going back to the earlier discussion of artists. There's a moment where this feels more like art than business in the sense that people do they have an idea, they do have a vision. It might not be a vision that's going to lead to like incredible financial rewards, but they have a vision of something.
Yeah.
It might be, in hindsight, a terrible idea. Who knows? But that's all judgment and that's all relative. And so they put their life into it. And so
Mhm.
actually, very similar to an artist with a painting or a novel, there's this moment of separation of the artist and the artwork, or you and the thing. And I have some empathy for that position of like, I really think this is my thing, and I'm an author, right? I'm not just a technologist. I'm an author of this experience, and I think it's very similar to art until the moment where it's like, yeah, but this is actually like a huge VC backed endeavor, and it's got a growth, and it's a hockey stick, whatever, and you're suddenly in a different position. But I think that there is some tension there, and I think fear is part of it. I think ego is part of it, but not always in a negative way, but just like I love this thing that I made. I
Mhm.
love this thing that I made, and I have empathy even for like somebody who's like really founding a thing and doing that. I just think from a business point of view and from a longevity point of view, you're really giving more credit to audiences, similar to an author or an artist. Like that story you wrote, half of that's going to get made up in the reader's mind again, anyways. So it's like
Okay.
similar to technology use. It's like, yeah, it might. Maybe if you're humble enough to observe the potential, you'll see actually what this could be good for instead of what you made, and then pivot. And
Mhm.
pivoting is part of successful businesses all over. I'm sure this is probably where you've helped companies do this, and you are the
Right.
expert in how to actually meet the
Pivot
market
gone
where it's
bad.
at.
Pivot gone bad is another top
Ooh,
reason
pivot gone bad. That's a good.
why startups fail, and that's usually because they're not researched. You're like, oh, I launched to no market need. I'm freaking out because I need to figure
Yeah,
out how to make money. So I'm going to pivot, and you do it without the research, without talking to your customers. So maybe we can end with like, how can we best balance the artist creator energy of putting stuff out there that like feels good and fills our cup with the but other people need to use it, interact with it, adopt it.
great question. There are a lot of steps in that, but I think one is interdisciplinary teams. Like surround yourself with people who aren't like you.
Mm-hmm.
Not like surround. I mean, there's probably a political reason to surround yourself with people who disagree with you, but I'm not even saying that. It's back to what we
Mm-hmm.
were saying before. It's like surround yourself with people who might just approach a problem differently. And
Mm-hmm.
as you're vetting this problem, and as you're searching for a product market fit, or as you're trying to figure out the real use, trust their expertise to put your expertise in check. And it's not even like uh, make critique. It's like make better, make better, make better. And that is at least one really important step in the journey to to not falling the trap to like so enamored with your own vision. Again,
Yeah,
we're talking about technology and a business mindset. We're not talking about creating art that's going to go on a wall. That's you
right.
can decide how you want to approach receptivity to art. We're talking here about making money. And if your interest is
Yeah.
not making money, but just shipping a product, hey, it's a different goal.
Well, I think the one big takeaway to connect kind of the idea of using the yes and improv game for practitioners trying to do better in your next like product meetings, brainstorm meetings, uh, practicing that yes and like make better, make better, make better. It opens up a lot of ideas and helps expand all possible solutions. At a certain point, you have to taper down,
Yeah.
but I think I find a lot of times if I remember my brainstorming meetings, people knock down other people's ideas naturally instead of making the effort to
I
build them
think,
up.
yeah, I think what you're speaking to is something like there's really intentional moments of building and really intentional moments of focusing.
Pairing, yeah.
Like diverging, converging is kind of classic design thinking speak. So, but the
Yeah.
idea of just like this is a mode where we're trying to create more things and see if we get somewhere better. There are other modes where you're trying to actually reduce the set and still improve as you reduce. And so if you take that builder's mindset as opposed to like the a wrecking ball mindset, even as you reduce, you'll get to a better place. And it's all about we. I mean, there is a we. Sounds so cheesy, but it is about the we and all that. And again, respecting the expertise that comes with an individual person because that's there and you
Right.
want that. So
Well, Dan, that is a great way to end the episode. Let's make it make sense when it comes to media, AI, the ego. I like the make it better, make it better. And there's a time for diverging and converging, just like the past 20 some years of copyright and the internet conversation, right?
right,
So
bringing it
thank
all
you.
together.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to Make Sense with me, your host, Lindsay Tavis, and my guest, Dan Perkle. We hope you enjoyed our take on all of this. Dan, where can people find you online? Do you want people to find you online?
Sure, I can be found. So I probably, I'm not. I mean,
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn is probably good enough.
Yeah.
Occasionally I'm on X doing something. X is still interesting. We can talk about it later. But yeah, I'm still on there a little bit, retweeting what do they call it even now? I don't remember.
Do they
Um,
retweeting?
LinkedIn is good. I have a page on IDEO.com. I gotta don't, but I think LinkedIn's the best for now.
Cool. I mean, there's a good old search engine or two you can use
Yeah.
to find
Although you
it.
find funny photos of me from like a long time ago where I'm like,
Yeah.
oh man, I've not optimized my own
If I
search
search
results.
your name on Flickr, what will come up?
Oh wow, Flickr. It's been a long time. I am on Flickr. I used to be on Flickr. What do you got?
I have a lot of photos on
Oh
Flickr
boy.
and they still email me that I'm over my usage. um,
Yeah, every once in a while, my old, not used but still existing DeviantArt page does come up. So yeah,
yeah.
that's another one.
So, final note, if you want to continue to be the smartest person in the room, make sure you're getting notified when each episode hits. So, on YouTube, hit subscribe, and audio, follow wherever you get your podcasts. Check out all the links and resources in the show notes. Thank you, Dan, for joining me.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome.